Hello and welcome to a setup in a slightly different order. Right, so this is Jonathan's Vintage V120 Les Paul Junior-y thing. Sorry if I used the wrong term. It's, you know, that kind of guitar, single P90. But before we get into the setup, I've started the game by taking off the bridge, and I want to show you something that has annoyed me for a long time. So I'm going to do a drawing somewhere. Let's put that out of the way. I'm going to probably do a drawing on the board or something just to clarify what I'm on about. So this bridge is one I've seen, or there are a number of bridges like this, mostly made by Wilkinson, and it comes with this strange thing here which houses the B and the G. Okay, so you've seen that before, right? And it's a wraparound, and the idea is you're able, well, this is the theory, actually nowhere claims it, because even the promotional material for this bridge, actually, I'm sort of standing right over the phone now so I can see this, promotional material for the bridge doesn't claim what this thing actually does, but when you look at it, you think, okay, this must be an attempt. Well, there's no real reason, surely, for just having adjustment on the B and the G on their own. You know, you can leave that hang and you come up with an answer that shows there is just a reason for that, but I don't know one. Except, the only one I can imagine is the occasion where you might want to have a wound G, right? So when you see the intonation position, forward, back a bit further, that is your standard three-plane intonation pattern. Then forward again for the D, backwards a bit for the A, and backwards a bit, a small amount for the low E. So you look at this thing, and it's bothered me for years, because I have looked at this thing, and I've never bought one, never looked that far at the claims for it, but it's always bugged me, because my instinct tells me this is wrong, this doesn't work. Now occasionally, it's one of those things that I'm not kidding, my instinct over years has kept me away from these, because something says to me, this is right, this can't work. And so I trust that intuition, and yet I haven't posted about it or made a thing about it, because when you look online, there's nobody explaining what they do with this. Not even Wilkinson explains what this is meant to do. And certainly nobody has posted anything claiming, what the hell have they done here, this is rubbish, right? And there are a few things like this out in the world. Now, I don't know, I could be wrong, and you might come up and tell me from years of experience why this thing works. But I'm going to take you through why I think it's an absolute emperor's new clothes, right? So just very quickly, for those who do a lot of guitar work, you will know one thing. I'll get my thing. Where are we? Okay, you will know that in a standard, what shall I call it? 3-plane and 3-wound intonation pattern always goes like this, right? You have the high E coming off there, you have the B coming off there, you have the G coming off there, the D coming off there, the A and the E. And the rule of thumb is that you can split this into two groups of 3. And you'll see, if I put the dots down here in the middle, right, or try and make some dots, you'll see that this is 2 halves, and it's a repeating pattern. And you can see that the way you remember it is, this is the shortest distance for any string, and the low E is the longest distance. Okay, and that is always the case when you have 3 and 3, right? 3 wound, or 3-plane and 3 wound. Okay, that is fact. It's so fact that manufacturers of bridges, I could pick one out of my box here and show you, manufacturers of bridges, such as, typically, got one right here to hand. There are, here we go, manufacturers of bridges. This is quite good. Such as this one, right? Build it in. I'll show you that one again in a second. So it's completely dependable. People go, well, no, mine fall in different positions. I have found from experience of loads of setups, if you find something that doesn't work like that, let's say, have to assume that you're fitting 3-plane and 3-wound strings, and you're not using strings made in Bulgaria, you're using let's call them D'Adarios or Ernie Balls, right? With 3 plain and 3 wound strings from a major manufacturer, you will get this pattern every time. If, for example, when you come to do it, you find sometimes something like this happens, right? Your intonation for one of your strings, let's say the G, falls to there, okay? And occasionally this happens, right? Now, some people leave it there. Well, that's cool, because if it actually does intonate that way, you may get a string that plays okay. But I know for a fact that is so far out of the pattern that it should be that that string, if it goes to there to intonate and it's a 3 and 3, I know that string is a dud, and I'll throw it away without even questioning it now, because I've spent years trying to find out what was wrong and so on. It's quicker, throw it away, put a new one in, and guess what? It'll go back to that pattern as expected. So I trust this pattern. I've said this loads of times on setup videos. Right. However, you move across a bit, and what you need, if you're using a, not a 3 and 3, a 2 and 4, so you've got 2 plain strings and 4 wound ones, you get the 2 plain ones go like that, and then the wound ones go forward a little bit, then back, then back, then back. Sorry, it's badly drawn. Okay, and that is your thing, and what happens is your division comes along there instead. Okay, and you get your high E, it's the shortest one, and your B, your wound G comes forward of the B, and then the rest of the wound strings step back from the wound G. That, my dear folks, is a 4 focus. 4 wound, doesn't look like any letters in the English language, 4 wound and 2 plain pattern. And the same truth applies. If they fall out of that and you are using 4 wound and 2 plain, I guarantee you, you can get rid of the one that's out of sequence and it'll fall into sequence. And the proof that this is true for a 4 wound and 2 is this bridge here, which is actually pre-compensated for exactly that. Look at that, how it goes. Right? First one, shortest. Second one, a bit longer. Third one comes back in front of the B and steps back in 4 from there. Okay, that is, I drew it badly, but that is essentially exactly that pattern there. So this pre-compensated bridge will work perfectly well if you've got 4 wound and 2 plain. It will not work for the 3 and 3 because that G will be out of position. It'll be far too far forward for a plain G. So now we come back to this. I better look down at it because it's hard to keep it steady. We look back at this and we go, what is this thing for? And you sort of look at it and you see them selling everywhere and you go, my logic goes like this, and I'll kind of talk you through it. I go, oh, you've got this thing that looks to be adjustable. Why do I say that? Because my brain says that kind of fitting there is an adjustable, movable thing, isn't it? You undo it and push things backwards and forwards. We've seen that intonation type of device before on other Wilkinson bridges, right? So you'll be forgiven for thinking it's about sliding it forward. So you go, all right, I'm going to set it up for a 3 plain and 3 wound. So you do what I did on that diagram up there, and you push it, you loosen it off and you push it back. So you've got shortest, a bit longer, longer again, pull forward of that one, and then step back, right? And those 3, sorry, I have to follow the line. So forward of that one, back a bit, back a bit. That's 3 plain and 3 wound. So you go, oh, right, so now presumably this gimmick is gone to all this trouble so that I can change it for a wound G, right? Which means this one here needs to come forward of this one, right? Oh, but look, it's fixed. Oh, that's a bit odd. First question I have in my brain says, well, why don't you just let me move this one? That will be in the same place, but that one needs to be there. Right? I'm going to scratch myself a little line. That should be there. So why is this in... Oh, I think to myself, I'll bet there's another piece that isn't this, that came with the kit, that has these reversed. So it goes, yeah, that's there, and then this one is forward. And you think, that's exactly what you have. This kit comes, or this bridge comes with 2 pieces, depending on whether you've got... And I look at the kits for sale, and the bridges for sale, and nobody in any review mentions it, right? So I think, well, can you achieve what you need by moving this. So you undo the thing and you go, right, let's focus on the wound ones. Oh yes, see the wound one? That needs to be forward of this one. Okay, brilliant. So you tap it down and you go, that's very good, you're allowed to adjust it. And you go, oh, but look, this now has pushed the plane B, which is still a plane B and should be behind this one, it's pushed it about 3 millimeters too far forward. So now the B is out of intonation in order to get the G into intonation. So that's no use. And I know it isn't any use. That will put the B out of intonation. So at this point, I'm thinking, they have got this so wrong that either I am completely insane and then I think to myself, here's my thought process. I go, Sam, you idiot. You know what they've done? They've got a reverse side of this, okay? So you can take this over and you can flip it long ways, right? So that this one goes back and this one comes forward. Ah, yes, but then you look at the shape of it and you go, well, that's curved and all nicely finished and there's a sort of socket to put the thing in to screw it down. But maybe they've doubled that on the other side. So in fact, when we get this, undo it and get it out, he says, hopefully to himself, this is a brilliant design, by the way, Wilkinson, if you ever want to do it. Maybe the piece, the insert, is actually shaped like this. Wouldn't it be amazing? Like a lozenge, right? And when you switch it over, right, you've got it, when you flip it round its axis, as the bridge is going this way, you have the G, wound G on top and the plain G on the bottom, or you can switch it round and it switches them over, because that end-to-end flip would do it. But the key thing is that in order to come out with still having a nice smooth finish like you have here on the top of the piece, right, you would have to have the same curve on either side, which means that the underside of this bridge where it sits would have to be similarly curved, but that wouldn't be impossible just for that section. That would be a fantastic solution. You just flip it over. So naturally I come back, it's a bit dark, sorry. I come back to this and I think to myself, well, now I've come up here prior to setting this guitar up and I go, right, let's take it off now. Let's prove that those clever people have done exactly that. They're not so stupid that they would make a thing that couldn't oh, it's completely flat. Okay, that's how I want it. That's actually how I want it, right there, like that. Well, is it how I want it? Not quite, actually. That's nearly. You could almost get away with that, right? See that? Nearly. Well, probably that's. Oh, we're close. Look, there's the correct intonation. Maybe there. That's your wound G in the right place, slightly forward of the D, and that's your B, potentially slightly back of the E. Maybe not enough room, and if you take there should be a bigger distance between these, because if you take that E back any further, sorry, the B back any further where it might need to be, then you're actually now level with the D for the G, and that means the D's out. But none of that makes any sense anyway, because as you see, it isn't a lozenge-shaped thing on both sides. It is a single piece, and there is no spare piece in the box that reverses this conveniently. So I'm whinging about this on this video because this is a bit of a Emperor's New Clothes. I look for anyone anywhere online to make a comment such as this about this bridge or this type of bridge that Wilkinson have done a few of, and I absolutely cannot find anyone who's raised a voice of objection, the slightest voice of objection about this bridge. Now, you might think, if you're looking at this, the Les Paul Junior, you might be thinking to yourself, what the hell are you bothering for? This is clearly a 3 wound and 3 plane set, right? So technically speaking, I just push this near enough into intonation position, and I can do this by eye, and I say, right, those are about the same sorts of distances, and I can fix that there and say that will work. I'm not bothered about it for this particular go. I'm talking about why is that stupid thing there at all, because it provides absolutely no functionality whatsoever. And nobody has ever, I've seen, ever challenged that or contradicted it or even questioned it. And unless you can tell me, and if you're going to tell me, right, remember this holds true always for standard strings that we use from the commercial manufacturers. That never deviates. Okay, it is always 3 and 3 or 2 and 4, and that's stretched back. It's a physical property that the wound strings, or as the string gets thicker, it needs a longer playing length, and as the strings are change to wound, they do the same thing as a general rule, but they come forward a little bit because they don't need quite as long as a plain string of the same same note would require. So this thing here applies universally, and so much so that I promise you that if you get them out, like I said there before, if you get them out of sequence, visually out of sequence, trust that, let your instinct be alerted to that, and change the string, not mess around with the intonation. So that's so uniform and standard, right, that this just does not fit in, and it's absolutely pointless. And I want to know, I'm going to have to talk to Wilkinson at some point. I want an explanation. I don't want flannel, and I don't want arguments, people yelling anecdotal stuff. I want a logical rebuttal of what I've just explained there, right? And I've also explained 2 ways this could actually work as a bridge that was modifiable for a wound G. One of them would be to have a separate piece here that reversed the arrangement, that you could just slot in and throw this one back in the box. That would be a great way of doing it. Another one would to have been really cute and have a lozenge shaped thing sitting in a curved dish that allowed you to flip it over this way. I'll do it slowly, this way, okay, and then put the thing back down and then tighten it up. That would have given us a perfect solution. What the hell they came up with this for? And funnily enough, I'm going to switch back to normal non-ranting now, but the funny thing is, this conundrum, I was saying to Claire at home just now, or a little earlier, it reminds me very much of the hassle that I have had with Seymour Duncan pickups, which I'll just illustrate very quickly. I found very early on in life that we have 52.5 millimeter E to E spaced bridges normally, right? And I started buying Seymour Duncan pickups for customers and found that when you put them in the bridge, if you had the strings coming off there, let's say, I found that the spacing of the pickups, poles, whatever kind they were, usually humbuckers actually, so it should have 2. I found the spacing of the pickup poles was ridiculous, right? So your strings always went like that when you used a Seymour Duncan humbucker, bridge humbucker, a bridge designated humbucker. And the reason why is that the E to E on your bridge was typically a 52.5 millimeter spread on a modern guitar. But for reasons known only to them, the spacing on many, still to this day, many bridge Seymour Duncan humbuckers is 48 or 49. It's usually about 48.5, something like that. So you can see that you're 4.5 or 3.5 to 3 to 3.5 at least millimeters out of alignment, and what you end up with is strings that sort of go quite a bit out of line until they're sort of touching there, but they're out of line there. Right? Now, first thing, as a person who thinks about things, is I say to myself, what the hell is that situation like that for? What guitar bridge is this range of pickups, or these bridge pickups that Seymour Duncan makes? What possible bridge are they thinking of for this pickup? Now, all I can think about over the years is that once upon a time, the bridges they made this for were effectively 50 millimeter spaced, and it could even have been, for all I know, it could well even have been the stop bar, the original Gibson Les Paul stop bar, no intonation, no pre-compensation. So, you actually would have had the strings on there, and they would have been, sorry, it's very badly drawn, they would have been much closer together, let's say 50 mil, and those would have gone over, or the would have been much closer to the, you see I've drawn it wrong, much closer to the Seymour Duncan, because once you go from a 50 millimeter bridge here, 49 is perfect, or 48, 50, 49 is great. So that makes, you could get away with a 50 or a 51 even, but it's not so bad to have, you want a bit smaller. I don't even think, to be honest, I don't even think 48, 49 is good, but if you're, sorry, for a 52, but if you're doing it from a 50, then 49 isn't such a bad thing. You give up that 1 millimeter for its distance from the bridge, and as you know, the strings are converging, not diverging, as shown in my stupid picture. Anyway, the point is, I came away with the question, what bridges today is Seymour Duncan continuing to manufacture 48, 49 spaced bridge humbuckers. And I checked, of course, a number of times. I've gone mad. This really is a bridge humbucker, isn't it? And yes, it's a bridge, and it's 48, 49. So whenever now, this is how stupid it is, whenever now I want to use a Seymour Duncan humbucker for a standard modern Chinese-made 52.5 spaced bridge, I have to use the F-spaced, which is supposedly a fender spacing, or what they call the spaced for a trembucker, spaced for a tremolo, or a Floyd Rose tremolo, which Seymour Duncan says is very, very wide, so here's our wider spaced version of the pickup. And I have been caught more than once in the past buying a standard Seymour Duncan for a guitar custom project, having it for a month or two before I got round to it, then fitting it and thinking, oh God, it doesn't work because it's a 49 and the strings are way outside of the poles. I can't give this to my customer, even if it plays fine. Your customer buying an expensive custom guitar from you is not going to be happy with strings that miss the poles, right? Either in either direction or dead symmetrically. They ain't going to be happy. So I've had to, twice now in my career, I've had to keep them for myself and then go and spend another £100 each time on a trembucker version to fit and look good for the customer. That is a stupid situation. And the truth of it is if you go to my house now, you will see two guitars hanging up in my place, where in fact this pickup has been moved to the front, to the neck, and I'm using the 48, 49 spaced pickups as neck pickups on a standard Chinese-made style modern guitar, because it cannot work at the bridge. It won't work at the bridge. So that's proof of how crap it is. It sounds pretty good. I mean, you know, they're not really that much different, I don't think. It's just the position most of the time. But, you know, just there's a little thing. Now, just like this bridge, I have never seen anyone explain this situation long enough. I have not seen people with enough attention span to watch and listen to that and actually work out actually come to the conclusion that Seymour Duncan may have made a stupid mistake somewhere and stuck to it, right? And I absolutely believe that's what they've done, based on once upon a time the holy grail of Les Pauls, which we're making our pickups, gold tops or whatever, you know, what do they call them? You know, the beautiful 59 bursts or whatever. Oh yes, they had 50mm spacing because they all ran uncompensated stop bars or something like that, right? Or maybe even if they had compensation, you know, classic whatever was 50mm, so we've made our stuff 50mm. And so they've made their pickups, and it's clearly become a convention, and it's stayed. But nobody will tell me, and I can't be bothered to write a long thing to explain this to Seymour Duncan, but nobody else in the business has ever come up with an answer to me that makes any sense of why that's the case. You know, but there we are. So that's just a long-winded, drawn-out start for this guitar. So this is the first of what's going to turn out to be 5 of Jonathan's guitars. Jonathan brought these down from East Sussex, East Sussex the other day, yesterday in fact. Yesterday? Yeah. So we're starting with this. There's 2 of these. There's this one and a distressed or relic version of it, which is interesting in how different it is from this one. If they're supposed to be the same guitar but with the finish changes, well, the distressed one, the relic one, is thinner. The neck, the headstock is narrower. The nut, the pickup, and the bridge are the same, and I'm presuming the electrics are the same, and the pickguard, of course. But very different feeling bodies. And in fact, I'm sad to say this, vintage, because I love vintage guitars. This is a nice finish, a pretty good finish. But unfortunately, the relic one is really naff. And Jonathan knows it. I mean, he brought it to me saying, "What do you think of that?" You know, and we both agreed. I what's the word? Validated for him that he's not mad. It is a pretty crap relicking. But anyway, we'll see that in due course. So this one is in for hopefully a refreshingly straightforward setup. And I say straightforward. He wants custom adjustable tusk nut. He wants the action lowering, frets leveled, and obviously bridge taken down for the action, and just playing the best it can be. And he's after a low light action with as flat a neck as possible. So that's a great, perfect deal for reloved guitars to do. So I sat down and gave this a little play this morning. And the first thing that happened is this. Vintage V120. I don't know if you can hear, but there's two things annoying me. But one is that's very odd. When I bend notes, it's making this crackle. But not when I play individual notes. The other thing that's annoying me about this guitar is this. Bloody annoying. Come on, Wilkinson. A little bit. Not so much here, but definitely here. So much so that I could get it to actually do something. Sorry. And I was really bending hard. Get that ping. And still a bit of that crackling. No idea what's causing that. So that's going to be an interesting exploration. The other thing, by the way, just as a point of interesting order, I've never bought one of these bridges before, and this bridge has always completely bamboozled me. So my instinct when I saw this type of bridge with the adjustable piece here, well, sorry, not adjustable, with this piece here, I assumed, my brain told me, oh, that's clever, they've made an adjustable bit so you can push it backwards or forwards depending on whether you're using 2 plain and 4 wound or 3 plain and 3 wound. And this intonation pattern right now is forward, back 1, forward a bit again, back 1, back 1. So this is set up in the standard 3 wound and 3 plain configuration. So I thought, well, okay, so what's the point of having this here? And then I kind of thought, well, it can't be about adjustment, because if you push that forward, it doesn't give you the right thing, because pushing this forward, you've got to keep these two in this position. So how can you keep that if you push this forward to get, if you go for the 4 wound and 2 plain, this one here on the G has to be forward of the D. So that would bring it to here, but it would push the B right forward, and that would be out of sequence. So I had to assume on looking at it, and actually I drew it out to try and make sense of it. So that's where it currently is, and I presume it's set up, well, it is set up for a 3, 3 and 3 configuration, which you can see easily. And now you can see from that there's something going wrong with maybe some interference or whatever in my room, because there are some strange things that happen in that space. But I'll test it again later on. I don't want that to happen again. And if there's something creating some sort of static, I don't know what's going on in bending the strings. Let's just hope it isn't a permanent situation. But the clicking of the strings in the bridge slot is another bloody letdown, Wilkinson. I mean, you know, I bent a couple of notes and that was clicking. That E and the B particularly were clicking. So, you know, I would have to take some stills and look in depth at this. There must be some imperfection in that slot leaving the front of the thingy, which it appears to be, from what I can see here, the way they seem to have done it is they seem, on the E at least, they seem to have, the slot doesn't actually complete. It runs to the front, and it appears there's a little, could be a little tab at the front that means that the string will be stabilized by the back of the slot, but it appears to me, unless I'm mistaken, that it might be lifted up over the top, or it may be there's a little tag. In fact, God, it's so hard to see in this. There's something about that. It isn't a clean slot, although it is along there. You see how it appears to be filled in with something? Now that ideally needs to be opened up without making too much impression. But the same applies all the way through. Well, some of them have evident. No, in fact, all of them are full. Ha! That's incredible. All of them are supposed to go over. Now, that's not a problem. You know, that just becomes the launch point. But if it's in any way damaged and it's causing them to click, then it is a problem, which appears to me to be what it's doing. So worst comes to the worst, if we just gently file down to clear whatever is causing the click in those slots, then we'll be in a better position. That bridge will play better. But as you can tell, it still in no way explains what on earth has been going on. Now, here we go into the sort of regular mode of things, because what I'm going to do while we've got the nut, well, we've got the strings off, because I had to take the strings off to get access to look at what's going on with the bridge. But I've got to put the bridge back on and set it to the right height, and I don't know how cooperative this is going to be, because I don't quite know how. This seems to allow you to get to where you want, then you just dial down and tighten with the grub screw. But what's odd about that is it has a great big Phillips type, no, not Phillips, flat slot on the unit, which doesn't appear to do much. I don't quite know why it's there. Now, so the first thing I'm going to do is, yes, this is clicking, the nut is pinging, right? So we're going to remove that. But I can pretty well see straight away that there is a risk of this breaking the finish. And we've been here before with vintage guitars. So one thing I'm not going to be wanting to take the risk of, I'm afraid, is that getting that nut out and having great shards, flakes of this coming back off there. So I am afraid, even though this is some sort of, it appears to be some sort of graphite-y thing, I'm afraid I'm going to cut it off, right? And this is, you know, some people might find that a bit extreme, but I'm telling you, the reason I have to do that is because they've chosen to apply or fit the nut that way. And what they've done, like some other manufacturers, who was I thinking of? I've forgotten now, but there was another, it definitely vintage, to name but one or two. And what they've done is they've put the nut in at the factory, and then they've finished up to the nut. And that means the minute an owner comes to tap this out, like an Epiphone, they don't do that. They do the finish, then they machine the nut slot, cut the finish dead straight, put the nut in its perfect place. And so when you tap it out, you have to be careful. You don't want to whack it because there's still maybe a little bit of distance below the level. But you tap it and it comes out, and you can gently remove it. This, if I tap this, it's going to splinter this. And actually, in the past, the whole thickness of the vintage black finish and the clear coat has come away at the same point. So no matter how sexy this thing looks, ladies and gentlemen, it's coming off, and it's going to come off destructively. So here we go. As you can see, that's quite some mess of stuff, and obviously we will kind of skid it out of the way as we go. So it's going to create a cut right down to the bottom. If you're cutting with one of these discs, you don't have to be too afraid of scarring the bottom of the nut slot. As long as it's not too deep, it's not going to do too much damage. Now you'll see that because of the angle I have to hold it, it's difficult to get a straight cut. We have to be tilting slightly in this way, but that's how it has to be. So this may be blunting the, it feels like it's making a nice blunt, it's kind of sticking to the Dremel bit or the disc, so it's a little bit difficult to get through. We can use another one which is a slightly different type, and we can get to the bottom of it and maybe it will stick a bit less, we shall hope. So a long time back in this workshop I lost the little C-shaped spanner thing that went with this Proxon whatchamacallit, and to this day in all my tidyings ups I have never found it, and so I have to use the adjustable spanner now, unfortunately. Now I need this at a fair stretch so I can reach without getting the body of the Proxon in the way. So we're nearly at the bottom of the dip. Give it a bit more spin. Obviously I'm working a bit blind at this point. Okay, so I'm somewhere close to the bottom of the slot, and I may have nicked it also with the thing. Now, the problem with this is it's almost certain that this has been glued to the front of the nut by the action of the finishing gun. So what we have to do at this point is it's going to damage it. So I'm going to choose that if it's damaged, I want to be the person that does the damage and controls it. Okay, so you can see that I'm going to now make a cut with my razor saw. Razor saw? Yeah, that's the one. Right, that's my job. If there's going to be a cut in this, I want it to be my doing, and I want it to be straight faced, laced and edged. I want it to be away from, safely out of reach of this nut when it comes up. So it's actually quite hard to do, but you can see I'm just cutting away, and I'm going to be just paying as much attention as possible to being able to see if I can break this bit now. That's really tightly glued. That doesn't want to come off anyway. It wants to come off comes off the face of the whatchamacallit, the rosewood, before it wants to come off. And we also have you can use the saw in this place as well. It's a very, very delicate saw, and so it may take a long time to get through the plastic. Like I say, people have said things like, oh, you get a blade and you score down the front of here. Promise you, if you score with this blade, the pressure of using the blade is going to splinter the finish. So in my experience, and it's not even guaranteed this way, but the best way to ensure a clean cut is to go in with a razor saw and make the cut down yourself in order to separate the finish from the nut. And it feels a bit odd because you're, in a sense, you're looking like you're cutting the headstock off a guitar, which you're genuinely not. Okay, so I'm going to call that I've freed the parts up from each other. What I might want to do is, let's look at this hardwood, this Japanese saw, see if I can get some this is really a wood saw, but as a pull saw, it's not a bad thing to be looking at to try and cut a straight line through this plastic. Now, as I say, we're playing it by eye here. We should be near the bottom. And again, the test of this will be how willing this piece is to come away. It's really tight. There we go, there's the back part separated out. That's good. And that's, that bit's broken and sort of ready to come out when it can. So you can see, even in this circumstance, the front part still feels very firmly attached to the finish, and that's the real unfortunate risk that you get with these vintage guitars. There doesn't seem to be any really straightforward way of getting the nut out without major damage, and you know, if you're kind of stuck with it, then it's not great if you can't change the nut. And I think that's a bad, pretty crappy commercial decision to make them this way. It's entirely because of, there you go, that's not what I wanted to do. See that? That's exactly, I was fractionally off, short of cutting that off, but that, even though I was down to the bottom of the thing, that wasn't, see, there's no way of knowing exactly. That's very close to being through that nut. But that piece decided to come up. Now, mostly, it's sort of mostly hidden, and I can attempt to fit that bit back in there. But even then, getting that off this piece of thing is quite difficult. And I've sort of got it off there, so we can refit that, put it to one side. So you can see what an absolute pain in the arse getting that nut off of that guitar is, and that just shouldn't be like that. And the reason it is like that is because they've made that decision to glue it in place with the finish, and there are only a few companies that do that, and as I say, unfortunately, Vintage has become one of them. It may always have been, for all I know, but I may have got lucky on previous attempts to change the nuts, but certainly in this case, the recent ones have definitely done that. Well, there's my refitted nut, but I've yet to do a bit more work on that. So what I want to do now is to attempt to get this. Now, I've never been massively lucky in refitting these things, these little chips, because you try and put them down and they almost never seat where you want them to. I don't have to shout because I'm talking to the mic, head mic. Yeah, they rarely sit where you want them to, and getting them back, they either stick to your finger, which is temptation, or they kind of goo finish up onto the top of everything. So I've got one of these little nozzles here. I'm going to just try and see if I can get some glue out of the end of. Now, they seem to dry up eventually. Yeah, so can you imagine somebody trying to get that nut off? It is practically impossible, which is such a silly shame, because it means, you know, that upgrade is effectively out of bounds to an average owner. That really shouldn't be the case. Right, now, as I said to you, these things often really don't want to go back in place, never as easily as the world would have you believe. See this? It just doesn't want to go in place. It goes over the top. Near enough. As near as I can get without doing any damage. I think that will probably set in place. And I've done this before, and I've pushed down on a piece of finish like that in some vain hope of making it fit better, and all that happens is it either squirts the glue somewhere you don't want it to go, or it breaks off more, or it does something just you don't want. So I'm going to hang fire, and what I'm going to do now while we're in this position is I'm going to bring up a little block of sanding paper, and I'm going to just tweak this nut now so it's going to fit perfectly back into that slot. So I've prepared this adjustable nut a little bit earlier while I was charging batteries, but basically I have sanded one face of it, and all I'm doing here is just reducing the other face so the two bits work together, and obviously it's got to get in past that little bit of repair as well without unsettling it. So I think there's probably a fraction more I can do on here. So the idea is to get it just down to the right size for this slot. Once that's done, the only real test of this nut now will be that it sits flush on the slot. Now I'm just looking there, that isn't quite flat on the slot, so I think I still need to take a bit more off. Yeah, so once this is in place, then I will just test the height part by, when we put the strings back on, or we'll try it with one string. The idea is that with this in and the grub screws left fully out, in other words with the nut not raised at all, the idea is we want this to sit with the strings on the first fret, so that from that point onwards all we have to do to get it into where the action we want is to raise the grub screws, that tiny amount. Now this may be slightly constricted because of this little repair bit here, and I'm sort of nervous about doing anything to it at all. Let's see if it's still moving in any direction, or has it decided it's pretty much settled. I think I'd probably be on the safe side of just thinning this down a fraction more. That's the best way. I don't want to put any undue pressure on that little repair. It just needs to be in well enough to sit down flush, which it nearly is, a fraction more. So that bothers me, Vintage, about the finish, the manufacturing process, and I'm not even sure that anyone in Vintage JHS or the manufacturing plant or whoever exactly it is that makes these, I'm not even really certain that they would have may have even thought about this in too much depth. But I found it's a terrible choice for I suppose you might say a starter guitarist, somebody who's maybe can't afford a guitar tech, or somebody who's trying to do this work themselves and wants to improve the playability of their guitar. I think having a nut that you can't remove without the serious risk of major damage to your finish is really lousy, and particularly because it's like that because of the choice of the manufacturing process chosen, that obviously suits the manufacturer but does not suit the player, the owner. Right, that's perfectly fitted. Whew. And then by the time we get that on, you'd hardly ever notice that the scourge of the Vintage nut had ever happened. But there we have. We know it has. Now that makes me really look forward to the next one tomorrow with the same nut same kind of guitar. Of course, that one's distressed, so I can afford to smash it to pieces. No, I'm kidding. So what I'm going to do now, since I'm going to do some fret leveling, I'm going to mark up these frets. Doing that, I can see a little bit of wear that's been well played, or reasonably well played. So I'm just going to get this ready, and then we'll put the bridge back on, and we will cut off some of the excess curly bits on the strings and feed them back through just for one last go, where they'll serve as tests for the nut, and also hopefully they'll serve for the sacrificial strings for fret leveling. So looking down at the bridge area here now, I'll now look at putting the bridge on, back on. Obviously you can see that it's kind of loose and rattling at this point. It's also interesting how it doesn't really seem to want to fit. It's a little bit odd. Right, so come back down this end for a minute. I'll come back to the bridge because I'll need to tighten this up. I'm just trying to see what we can see. Right, so we've got a bridge, no, a nut that isn't stuck in. We've got strings that have been at some point tied on. Now that's one thing, Jonathan, I beg of you not to do. So I'm going to leave the low strings and I'm going to go for the D first. When you're using an adjustable nut, I recommend you put the D on first. Now I'm going to push through past the kinked bit that is where Jonathan tied the string on. Please don't do that. All that does for you, and actually for a tech, is it just increases the great chance of you scratching the headstock when you have to sort of poke around with a sharp implement to get this little thing undone so you can get the string off, or when you put it back on like I just did and the bit that's curled absolutely insists on trawling around, and it always bends downwards and it always tries to cut the headstock finish. So Vintage have given you enough trouble with that with their manufacturing method. Don't help them along the way. So with a piece like this, I've got quite a lot of overhang and I've got a kink, and I'm going to just get rid of that because I don't need it, just to get this to get through, I hope. And I won't go through very far. So what I'm going to do just now is I'm going to get these strings on with the new nut, and I won't tighten them up, but now having put the middle two on, you can see that I'm basically holding the nut in place, so it can't go anywhere. I'm just going to pull this a little tiny bit. There we are. So the nut is secured, or the insert is secured, and it's going to pull the bridge. Be back with you in a second. It will, in a second, pull the bridge. Oh no, this is impossible. It's actually tangled up. It's doubled itself underneath the D string. Can you actually believe it? How did that do it? Yeah, that's the other downside of what's the word? Wraparound bridges. They have this habit of not being an absolute pain to get the strings to stay in place as you're tightening them up, because the strings are really only sitting on a slight depression. You see the nut has moved a little bit now, which isn't a problem. We'll just get it back into place like that, and then we'll get the we'll get the G in place like so. Nut will end up where we want it when I put a bit more tension on, but I don't want to put too much tension on because of course I want to lower the bridge and get the action right. So at this point I'm just hoping mainly to get the honour of reusing these strings to do the setup work. But yeah, what a bad choice. There is another company who does it, and I can't remember who I recently got caught out with. Someone a bit like Vintage. It's Harley Benton, that's right. Harley Benton does it the same way too. For all I know, could even be in the same factories. But they, yeah, I found myself having to repair great chunks of Harley Benton headstock for the same reason. Now this one is a bit shorter to begin with because it broke off whilst trying to undo the knot. So that's another thing that often happens, is as you're trying to take them off, the knot gives up because it's been overstressed. It's not a problem if you're just changing the string, but you can see now it's going to prove, because it's curled, it's now going to prove to be very difficult to get this back in and hold it in place. I'm going to try it this way now, long enough to tighten it up and use it as a sacrificial string. I might just do it. Okay, so we've still got things floating around in my head, like one of which is the notches on the front of the bridge, and it's clicking, and I can probably demonstrate those to you again in a minute once we've got this under tension. And really it's a matter of deciding how we can, if at all, fix that problem. And like I say, really, if it's still doing it, about the only thing we've got is amend the front edge of the slot. It also, because they're not really proper slots at the very front edge, they still allow the strings to move, which is pretty naff. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is, we've got two things that are interrelated here. We've got the first fret action height, which at the moment is a little bit high on the bass side. So all of these strings are starting up higher than sitting on the first fret, except, by the look of it, the high E. That one actually seems to be sort of lined up there from the outset. Now what we can do is we can go a number of things. We can either sand down the bottom of that thing there, or where are you? Count sound, pop size, adjustable nut bases. Haha. Or we can dig out our box of parts and, oh shoot, or we can find another one that's a smaller one to begin with that gives us a lower start point. So if we don't want to be, I often don't like to sand them down if they're the wrong size. I'd rather use a custom built one for the right size, because what I don't want to do is thin down the base of this thing to a point where it's non-existent. So if we take a stop, we're going from probably the highest one. So to get it off here, I'm just going to wind in the grub screws and push the unit out of the base piece. Now all that we sacrifice by getting rid of that is we're going to lose some height, but we're sacrificing the already flush smoothed edges, which we're going to need to do again. But we take the much lower piece, and we fit it in again, which is always a nice fit. Then all we have to do this time is to just very carefully bring this back to flush, like so on that side. Just double check it. It's pretty good, but we need to just do the same on that side. And so there we are. Now this will hopefully give us a better start point. There is an in-betweeny size, which I guess I could have tried as well, but I'm confident this will work. So I'm just going to slide that in there and get a feel for it. Get a feel. There we are. That seems to work okay. Let's put the D back in. Put the A back in. Put the E back in. Let's tighten up the D. So a bit. Sorry, you can't see this, but all right, push it in. That's it. That was a little bit of a tight fit, but it will hold it in place, so it's not such a bad thing. Put the G back in. So you can see there's quite a few little details on this, things to note. And I say there may be a connection between the fact that Harley Benton and Vintage are choosing the same production process where it comes to the nut and the way it's fixed in. Because the problem is, as you probably could have guessed now, is that doing the nut, putting the nut on and then spraying up to it, evidently locks the nut into there. It sort of fixes it in like it's part of glue, or it's glued it in really. That's what it does, and it's not ideal, because any attempt to remove it, as you saw, even the carefulest attempt is likely damage. Alright, now that's in place, that's seated quite well. Right, now we've got to make adjustments on the action down here at the bridge. We'll ignore the pinging for a minute. So I'm going to get my string height action gauge out. Let's put you into a far view for a minute. So down here I'm going to, oh dear, this is so ridiculously far forward. So you have to, this doesn't make a terrible lot of sense to me. We have this thing here that locks the piece down, and this should flatten out the riding of the thing. So if I take the pressure off it for a minute, it's not great because in a way you do want to be under some pressure when you adjust the bridge. That's your best situation, but let's take as much of the force off it as possible without the strings coming off. Okay, right, so not ideal, but first of all we've got a bridge that's sticking a mile up, so the first thing we ideally want to do is to get the overall action right. Now, unless I'm completely mistaken, I really don't know how this is going to work, because it certainly doesn't work. This goes up and down overall height, and then we have to lock it down. But if we can't do it without if we can only do it with no pressure on it, then we don't really have a good call on the action. I'm going to kind of hope that that's sort of close. In which case, now we want to tie down the tightener, which goes like so, and then that should straighten the bridge out. That's the idea about it. Keeps the bridge straight, and then we have an action that's about right, 1.5, 1.2. So I think we're there. It might change a bit when I put under tension. So not that difficult, but I don't really like the design very much. So tightening. So putting it under load. Double check playing action down this end again. A little bit. No, what is it? One. A little high. And that's a little high. So when it tightens up, it's a little high. Not really what we want. So it does need it to be slacked off. Now that's the crap part of it. What a silly design. You can't adjust it under enough pressure to measure the actual position of the strings. So back we go. We undo this, and hopefully we can go down. Let's go down half a turn. Represents about half a mil. This seems to be interestingly higher on that side than that side. The problem is, you see, if you leave it like that, then it tilts forward, so you have to tighten it up to test it. There's no way round, so that means we're now yet again retightening the strings. Have a measure. I mean, it doesn't have to be obviously full tilt, but we have to get the strings up to pitch enough to register the height. Okay, that's just over 1, and that's a bit under 1 now. Okay, so that's interesting. No, they're about the same. Okay, so we need to bring the high E up a tiny bit. So all of this toing and froing is a bit of a faff, I have to say. Undo. What did we say? Raise up. So we're going to raise up a fraction, raise up there a fraction, and raise up here a tiny fraction. Right, now we're going to lock it back down so it doesn't tilt, which is a good way of doing it, but it would just be so nice if the machining was good that it didn't tilt in the first place. But right, we're close to where we want to be. It still ended up with a bit of tilt on it. Okay, we're 1.5 there, and we are just over 1 there. That's our target action. God knows what will happen if we have to adjust those notches. That's another question. We'll come back to that. Then we've got a very low first fret action. In fact, the way I describe it is as low as it needs to be to play. So I'm just going to adjust whatever it needs to be either end to play. Now I'm close to, or at the point of getting a tune. Okay, so now we have the height right. We've still got 10s on, and I'm going to put 9s on because that's what Jonathan supplied me. And I find these are quite stiff, not very bendy anyway, but if the question is if he's, I've asked him by email if we can also change it, but if he's happy with 10s, well no, start another way around. If he's happy, if he really likes what's on here, then I will probably have to fit 10s later again. But since he gave me 9s, I'm going to fit them first, which will make them a bendier experience. And there we have our strings and our setup pretty much done. Again, now I'm just going to check the relief. And the relief, because it's got 10s on, it's probably pulling a bit much. I'm going to leave it where it is. It may be a bit less in a short while when we come to when we come to change it to 9s. So for the fret leveling, I'm just going to give this banana bar a quick dust off. I bought the other day, because I probably will be having a bass commission shortly, and I also didn't enjoy, I got that, 2 magnets stuck together. No way in God's earth I'm going to get them apart much. Yeah, so I bought myself a bass length banana, which is going to be good for a bass guitar. I wouldn't use it on here. I've done bass setups before with other bananas, you know, different types of truss rod, and when they're bass length, the regular style are a little bit on the bendy side, so I don't really like that. So we're not going to do that in future. Okay, so we have very low action at this end on the, actually that's enough, don't touch it, doesn't need adjusting. So now we're going to take the reading or calibrate the truss rod, the banana, and get ready to level these frets and try them out as we go. So a little bit more curve in the neck than I've got. So I'm here in the afternoon partly because I've got a Queen's Jubilee meeting at 6:30. So I thought instead of doing that and then coming here, I'm going to start here and go there and do it that way round. Okay, we're good to go. So, and here we go. Busy, it's noisy I should say, out here during the day, a working day. all the salvage recycling noise going on. Right, so this is a long view. This is the fret leveling process, and we're going to just see what we've got. Very lightly kiss everything over. The idea is this first run of the leveling beam, or the banana as I call it, tends to tell us what's going on with the neck, and then it's confirmed or disproved by the second run. So straight away, cutting there, a little bit of a low spot here, cutting a low spot there, and a low spot right at the end. So we might find that if we're bending high notes on here, the 12th, 13th, 14th, and the 15th fret, we might find that chokes out as we bend, or possibly down here on the 9th. So that's as I said many times before, the playability of any neck or any set of frets is governed by the lowest, or is usually dictated by the lowest fret rather than the highest. But the idea at this point is to see in that gap, start to just choke out, but we'll get rid of that on the B track. So I'm going to leave the A right there. That's pretty good. Sorry, the E right there. So yeah, so your lowest fret is a hole, which makes, when you press into that fret, it makes the next fret appear relatively high, and with all the problems that come with a high fret, i.e. The strings can choke out and bends choke out before you want them to. So that shows us that the low fret, the high fret's easy in a way that you sort of take it down until it matches those all around it, and doing so very lightly touches the frets around it, but it mostly takes off that one fret. When you have a low fret, you have to bring down the surrounding frets. You bring down the surrounding frets to effectively bottom out the high fret, and that's what I have to do a lot of the time. And it's almost always, in my experience, the low frets that are problematic. And sometimes you'll occasionally get a single low fret, and that may be caused by, who knows, somebody's maybe hammered it too hard, or the wood was softer there, or it could even be sometimes that there is just a tiny kink in that part of the neck only, but it's more and more, seems to me, that the low frets come in pairs or triplets, and that's usually because of the fact that they occupy the same micro valley or something, you know, this little valley in the guitar neck. And of course, being organic and anything but perfect, the neck has strange little ups and downs, and this process of leveling usually quite clearly reveals them, as it has. So we've still got we've got a low one there. That one's no longer low. This one is no longer low, so it was low at the edges here, so the E might actually be okay by the time it gets to the middle. So that's kind of positive, but it's just being able to read it and know what's going on. So I'm going to do a little bit more in the G track at the top end. And sometimes eagle-eyed people will go, look, he's just turned his truss rod round. Why has he done that? And I don't know is the answer. It's just that I always use it the other way around most of the time. So when I just think I'm in the mood, I switch it around the other way. It is part science, part who knows, making it up. Now there's still a little bit of playware down here on this G track, and I could just tack it a tiny bit more just for the sake of cleaning it up, because it seems a shame to leave it in there. But it's a bit of play wear on what is effectively a little bit lower fret, so we may not be so easy to get it out, but we can try. And that probably won't do any harm at all, just that little bit of extra work down that end. Right, now we line up on the D. What you tend to find then is that sort of slight buzzing or rattling seems to increase as we get down into the fatter strings, and some folks might think, well, you're getting more fret buzz, and that's why I like to differentiate between fret buzz, which I personally call the buzzing or choking you get when there's one or a couple of high frets close together getting in the way of other frets, and it tends to be very clear where they are, and it's usually only one spot in the whole of the neck. Then there's the other thing I call fret slap, which is a kind of buzz that as you get down on the thicker strings, you tend to hear all the way up, or in at least a big chunk of the neck as you're going up. And for me, I call it fret slap because I think that's not caused by individual uneven frets. See? We've got rid of the zizzing as well. Fret slap is caused by, I think, groups of low and up and high frets, and that's the hill and valley thing going on. And for that, I switch into another mode in my head, although it doesn't look any different, but I see myself as using this tool to gently impose its curve, which is a little bit more idealized and more perfect, oddly enough, because of the way we sample its 3 points along the curve. I then try to map this curve onto the neck without, if possible, without distorting the curve on here. So I tend to sort of stay in the middle with my hand, and I tend to kind of do a lot more backwards and forwards in, and hopefully it seems to work, that it kind of ekes out a little bit more space for the strings to move, and that reduces, in some cases eliminates altogether, that thing I call fret slap, which actually is courtesy of the hills, peaks and valleys. Tends to be a slight lack of room for the strings to spin. Not bad at all. Now I know there's a fair bit of that slap in the low E, and the idea now will be to eradicate it or reduce it as much as is possible. That's good. Calibration is still right. Drop off, spread the strings out, and away we go. Looking out for any fret wear. That's all good. Now it's very common to find the fret ends are always a little higher and a little bit more uneven than the rest of the fret, and I don't know, it has to do with the way frets grip the slot, and towards the edges they don't have grip holding them down on both sides. I don't really know, but it tends to be the edges you do find some unevenness. Tiny bit left up there, but most of that we saw before is gone, just in that one leveling, so I'm happy with that. And I'm now going to look, he turns it round, he's now focusing on this end alone. But what did he say about the mapping the curve by holding it in the middle? Yes, well, somehow he's pressing a little harder on this side now to kind of even out the last bit of this neck. Well, whatever he's done it, and you aren't going to stop him. It may be black magic, but it probably has worked. Probably, definitely. So that is the fret leveling done. Now, what we don't still know is, are we getting clicks? We still are. I'm going to take a break for a drink, and I'm going to prepare. Well, actually no, what I'll do first is I'll take the strings off. Well, no, I'll leave them on. I'll take a break and I'll get a couple of, I'll make some close-up pictures if I can with my camera, so I can take a close look at this, the ends, or the, whatever these things are called, where the strings go over the thing, and I'll see whether this actually needs clearing to work properly, because it's absolutely hopeless if there's a sort of semi-formed piece of stuff in the way. But I'll need my camera for that. So I'll see you after my break and for the next bit. Okay, just before I'm going to re-radius the frets. So having thingied them, leveled them, it's now time to make sure they're proper fret shaped. So I'm using my trusty StewMac fret recrowning file, and I don't think it will take very long with these because there wasn't an awful lot of material required to level them. So I'm going to get this done, and then the next step will be I'll go off camera and do the polishing out, or sanding and polishing. While I was just off camera, I also made very slight notches in the bridge, because I think it's not very effective that the bridge, the ends of those slots are filled in, and with no notches. If it was no notches at all, or there was nothing, then you wouldn't get a click, but there is some little depression, but it's obstructed, so it's clicking. So I think it's better to have a distinct notch, which I've made, and I have sanded out so that it won't be sharp and don't risk breaking the strings. So again, not a great outcome on this bridge Wilkinson, I have to say. I know that Wilkinson has partnered, or no, Wilkinson is making, has sort of diversified, I think, it from a sort of, they used to be the budget, but good quality budget thing. But now what they seem to have done is that they've split their product into two. There seems to be a budget version, and what their budget version used to be is sort of trying to move into just being a really, good quality, competitive priced, along with everything else. So what's really happened is that their budget stuff, I'll give you an example, made in cahoots with, or under license with Music Lily, one of those factories out there in China. For example, it goes under the name of M series, so you can get pickups, you can get tremolo bridges for Strats and so on, and a few other things. Now I've bought a couple of those M series tremolo bridges, and I have to say they're not as good, and I think that's a shame. Possibly go as far as saying it's a mistake, really. Yes, they're cheaper. I would rather have paid 35 quid for the original quality. Oh no, I haven't finished yet. Oh, don't take the stuff off. I'd rather have paid 35 quid for the standard, as in good quality, Wilkinson bridge, than to pay £19 or £20 for a M series copy of it. Because the first thing that happened is that on the M series one is that the little screw that is supposed to hold the tremolo arm in, which is probably one of the main reasons why I like that bridge, that just stripped its thread straight away, and so the whole thing doesn't work. The whole the whole tightenable tremolo, push-in tremolo arm doesn't work, and I think that's just a real pity, because I will now have to pay more for the original prototype if I can find it, and actually if I trust that they haven't also compromised the quality of that. Because, you know, suddenly you have different things coming around with different names but look the same. It starts to feel a little bit like which is which, what's what am I buying here? Anyway, so I don't think it, maybe they're making money and hand over fist and it's a brilliant idea, and what do I know? I'm just a guy who barely gets by setting up guitars. But just from a user's point of view, it didn't seem like a good move to me. Anyway, so what I'm going to do now off camera is I'm going to sand and polish all of these frets out, after which I'll come back and we will be into restringing mode. Yeah, well, I could continue to film this, but it's incredibly boring. I'm just thinking about, you know, avoiding having stops and starts and stuff in the video. It's very boring, this bit. But let's just do it. And since I've got the microphone head mounted, I could even be failing to record, because the other day, the last time I used this, it was making some pretty unpleasant cracking noises. So if it does the same again today, I apologise, because that's all you've got. And if it does, it means that it will be time for it to be retired. But the interesting thing was I saw this on an old photograph in my, you know, my whatever, Google Photos or wherever the hell photos, I don't know anymore. Whatever they call that, cloud storage, whoever. On my phone, maybe not on my phone, whatever. Anyway, I saw an old picture of me wearing this head-mounted thing at a band practice in 2015. So, you know, it's 7 years, at least 7 years old. Probably a bit more, because I didn't use it for the first year or so that I had it. So, I might just take that out for a minute. Give me a clear run at the end here. Right, so this is what I tend to do with the first sheet. I tend to do it by hand, and I don't know why, I just make sure by hand that I cover all surfaces of all the frets, and then I go to the slightly pointed thing which makes more noise. And when I have a situation like this, and it's could be a bit make a bit of runoff off the block, then it might be worthwhile just putting a bit of tape across here. I'm kind of nervous to put it where I've just done that repair, but I'll do it anyway. So that's just to kind of protect it from any chance that the block runs over. So yes, so it's old, this microphone. It's been good though in its day. Quite handy to have. I think I got it at a bit of a decent price. I think paid £100 for it. I'm pretty sure that I had it for the first couple of years, or a good couple of years in the shed, and I couldn't use it because it wouldn't interface with the GoPro that I was using. And really only when I finally got the iPhone 12 that it would interface with the video recording software, because only on that camera or that phone did the video software recognize the sound coming in from this mic into the USB port. So I think with this, Jonathan, your experience of this, you'll find that it's incredibly low. Right, I had to adjust it with the camera off because this action, it was playing, but the action on the high E string had gone just below 1 millimeter, so it's ridiculously low, even though it was playing perfectly well. I brought it back up a fraction, so, but it will still be a ton lower. At at both ends. Now, what I don't know of yet is whether or not the crackling will happen, but I'll just listen out for that here at the end. So, slow, boring process of sanding out. Watching, I saw a report, or a piece from Ukraine the other day. You may have seen it, showing there's quite a few videos showing the Ukrainian drones dropping bombs very crudely, like First World War, dropping them out of their biplanes at the ground. And now we've got drones doing it in the 21st century, and they turn out to be frighteningly effective, and they can drop these bombs into little groups of soldiers without them even knowing to begin with that there's anything there. And they can also do a fair bit of damage to tanks, although they're not necessarily very, I don't think they're powerful enough to blow them up in one go. But there was a video I saw when the drone operator dropped a bomb onto a group of soldiers, and you could see one soldier was injured, and immediately you could see in the footage he was sat down on the ground fixing a tourniquet on his leg, while the others scrambled for a pickup truck type, not pickup truck, but an RV type of thing. And they got on board, and the drone dropped another bomb which went straight through the sunroof, which was open, and exploded on the soldiers directly in the car. And the car sort of swerves a bit for a couple of yards and ends up stalled in a ditch or up the bank. And you see there's a soldier laid out inside. There's two that have fallen out onto the road that are barely alive, and the one in the car probably is in his final spasms. And it's just horrific to think that these poor, most of them, the poor mistreated soldiers have been sent to do these terrible things, culture to do these terrible things, and then to end up being destroyed in such a public way. And not that it makes any difference if you've been killed has been killed, but for the mothers and family of the young boys that they're 19, 18 years old, for their families having to live with the sight of them in their last moments, it's pretty horrific. And I'm not, I have exactly as much and more sympathy for the Ukrainian people tortured and mistreated and murdered by the Russian soldiers. So it's not, I'm not showing special affections for any side. I think it's utterly tragic that an individual politician, who I could tell you just on my normal radar of people that he's a dangerous and unpleasant man, just as I can tell them when I spot them in this country. I stay away from them. I don't have anything to do with people that trigger my radars that way, my alarm bells that way. But, you know, the president of Russia and his minions are clearly men born of a century of terror. I've said this before, that their psychological makeup comes from a history that we have no direct equivalent experience of, and I think it leaves Western people, including Americans, pretty uniquely ill-equipped to make character judgments about them. I think if you, like I have, if you've read a lot of Russian history, I think you're in a slightly better position to understand it, but not many people I meet have. And it's why I kind of take my cue from the people who know, which is, I've said before, the Ukrainians and the Poles who've lived under Russian Soviet rule and who live next door and are the ever-present threat. And those people know and are qualified to know far better than people of other nations usually about what these threats really are, or what the threats, or the way that the Russians think and act. I did see a very interesting video. Guy's name was Vlad Drexler or something. Anyway, he put out a video saying 3 ways to avoid nuclear war with Putin. And the first one, I can't remember all of them, but the first one was interesting in that it was something like, effectively, Western leaders stop insulting him. Now, you might, in the Western sense, you might think, well, he deserves to be. He's chosen to go and destroy a country and take over a sovereign, take over and invade and ruin a sovereign country, and therefore he deserves to be insulted, and free speech, and let's call him for what he is. But the guy who made the video points out that you have to understand the impact that man-to-man insults, when one man impugns a Russian man, it creates a certain kind of automatic, and this isn't to excuse Russian males if they can't control their offence or whatever, but anyway, the point is saying, if you're pragmatic, if you're realistic, you will know that a surefire way to get get the worst out of your Russian dictator, whose actions you are fearful of, is to encourage or allow your senior politicians to heap insults on him, because Putin's sense of it's ego, but it's maybe something else as well. But anyway, his ego reacts massively and negatively to that. And I guess the guy's saying, not making apologies. He's not apologist for Putin. He's just saying, if you want to, if you believe there has to be any solution eventually through any kind of dialogue, then don't start your game by insulting the Russian leadership, or don't encouraging your leadership, making a kind of virtue of insulting and mouthing off and so on at the Russian leadership. I totally could get I could understand what they were getting at, and I think another way of putting it would have been to say, you need to understand the peculiarly Russian response or reaction to things, that way of speaking about people. And I understand that. I think there's an interesting food for thought there. And he also said, it doesn't matter if you and I, citizens, call him lunatic, psychopath, or whatever you want to call him. He said it matters that it isn't constructive that the Western leadership you know, flex their little pink muscles and, you know, do talk up a storm and throw in a few sort of tough talking insults at the same time, you know. And I guess what the guy's saying is, he's saying literally, in your universe, that might not be at all any kind of sane motivation or rationale for finding yourself at the end of a nuclear strike. But in the Russian male leadership mindset, it might well be. And it's down to, you know, people say, well, it's, you know, shouldn't curb my what I feel about him just because he might be, or he might react badly. And then actually you might ask a, you know, police hostage negotiator, when I go and confront the loony guy who's got the gun, do you think it makes sense to, you know, kind of heap insults on his manhood or his what he has or hasn't achieved in life? And of course they would tell you absolutely do not do that. It would be a stupid thing to do. So the same really applies here. I thought it was a good piece of advice, but clearly not being taken by people like Brad Johnson, Janet, Brad Johnson, the erstwhile Prime Minister of Airstrip 1. What was Airstrip 1? That was Orwell, wasn't it? Airstrip 1. That's what Britain was called. Airstrip 1. Okay, so having recrowned the frets, I've then polished and sanded and polished them out, and now I'm going to be applying the D and the G first of all. And then, whoops, I'll get them in the right place, might help. Yeah, so when I put the, I'll tell you what, let me come down this end, because it's all bounced off. I'll come down this end because, Jonathan, I want to show you what I do as a way of definitely not doing the tied-on strings. You don't need to if you do it this way. So we start with a D, come down here, and what I do is I put the string through, pull it taut, get it clear. These wraparounds go out of place very easily to where they shouldn't be. But so I'm going to get this on its D slot, then pull straight through, and then I'm going to grab and pull back one fret at around about there, and I'm going to wind on. As I wind on, I'm going to lift up and keep the held string taut and make sure it goes over the loose string. So once the loose string goes underneath, I pull that up in the air, and keeping the string taut, I push downwards and guide it underneath the loose string which is sticking up, and then I just let it go taut, locate it in the bridge down there so it's in the right place, and then trim off the excess. So this will never come undone. You don't need the tying on business, which, as I said, really only increases the risk of damage when changing strings and doesn't add any positive benefit. And what you'll find is, I don't doubt that with the tuning being unstable, particularly since your nut was pinging beforehand, then it's highly likely people think tying the string will help stop it, because they're part of their intuition suggests to them that I forgot to put oil on, hang on, suggests to them that the guitar is going out of tune because the strings are coming back through the tuner, which isn't the case. So what I think, there's the oily rag. Yeah, so what it isn't that, and I think the thing we need to be clear about is that once you've solved that problem with the correct nut with lubrication built in, you'll find that it doesn't go out of tune, and especially when I've stretched out the strings thoroughly before playing. So you find that it suddenly no longer goes out of tune because the nut is right and the strings are stretched. And that way you won't need anyway there won't really be a temptation to tie the thing in knots. So definitely don't encourage that. And I get on I'm a bit complainy when it comes to that, because not only do I have to poke around with a sharp object to free those strings up, I run the risk of damaging your guitar in the process, which is a shitter. I don't want to, pardon me, it's a bum deal. And more than that, well, on top of that, I also usually end up getting stabbed by a string and shedding blood on your guitar as well, which I don't want to do, if I can help it. Okay, so I've put some oil on, and now we're going to do the G. So the G in place, make sure it's in its slot as close as possible. Pull back one. Now this one I have to hold it down there because I'm doing it left-handed, and I just hold it and make sure the loose one goes under, which it does, or guide it if I can't be sure of it. Again, hold on to the held string, and with a bit of hand gymnastics, push that underneath the sticking up loose string, and then let it come round and kind of tighten up a little bit. And again, go back to the slot and push them in, because if you don't, they'll never go in there if they're free will. Okay, so now I've done those. Effectively, the loose part, the top part of the adjustable nut is now in place, and it won't go anywhere. It's been held down by those two strings. So at that point, I will put on the A and the E, and I probably should have saved time by lining up these, peg holes. I hate calling this a peg head. I think it's just such an odd word. I know, what's his name? Dan Erwin, Dan Erwin of Stu Mac calls them peg heads, but don't like it. Okay, so there we have that. Get in your slot, and the E. Yeah, so this in this guitar so far, you've seen some of the weird and wonderful challenges of the vintage budget brand. You know, in particular that problem with the nut and the way they glue it in, and that finish goes a millimetre or two up the front side of the nut, and when it sets against it, and it's glued itself in place, and it doesn't just sit around the nut and then rest in there and threaten to break if you push the nut too hard against it. As you've seen, it won't even let go of the nut without taking some of the chunk of the finish with it. So I did everything I could possibly do to reduce the likelihood of that, but unfortunately it still didn't quite work. Although thankfully it was relatively minor, but that is the absolute downside. And as I said a few times in this video already, I just wish they wouldn't do it that way around. I wish somebody could tell them, and actually I'm probably in a reasonably good place to tell them, since I talked to them with a repairer account. You never know, they may listen, and I've spoken to their MD. And on a different tack, I could probably talk to Kate Wilkinson about the bridge separately as well, should I want to kind of make a point about that, because it just seems a crazy design. So it's almost as if it looked good enough on paper and they went for it, and then down the line it kind of didn't quite notice that it didn't work, and then nobody told somebody that it didn't quite work or do anything, and then it just sort of got left, and then they carried on making them, and thankfully nobody asked too many difficult questions about what the hell is this supposed to actually do, if I may be so bold, because quite often in any walk of life we're often quite nervous to ask from that sort of I don't understand this point of view. So I think maybe that's part of the dynamic why people just don't say anything, and they just kind of think, oh well, if I don't understand it, it must be something I don't understand, rather than somebody's designed an odd product that doesn't really do much the way it appears to. So you keep having to do this with these wraparound bridges. You keep having to undo them, move the string across into its slot, and so on. Right, now get all my spare bits away in the bin. So that's that. Now, I've said on every video for the whole of history that tuning stability on any guitar is down to two things. Let me just zoom out now. It's down to two things. First one is the nut that we choose to put on it. And here, as you can see, we're not only using Tusk, but we're using an adjustable, custom-made adjustable version of a Tusk nut. Sorry, a custom-made bass to utilize an adjustable Tusk insert that Tusk made, or Graphtec made originally, to solve a problem on the Gibson Les Paul. The point being is, as soon as I saw that they made this thing, or when I finally came across this thing, it solved my problems of spending years trying to cut nut slots to give a perfect first fret action. Anyway, the story behind the Gibson thing was they brought out, after years of terrible nuts that were always out of tune and too high over the first fret, they did something finally quite smart, and that is they brought out an adjustable nut which they called the 0 fret nut, when it kind of was, but it was set in an adjustable cradle that meant you could make these little adjustments to get the perfect first fret action. As soon as I didn't know that when they brought out the Gibson with that on. The reason I came to know about it was that a year or so after they released it, I noticed that Graphtec suddenly had started making this insert, and I wondered why. And then it became quite obvious quite quickly that Gibson's original 0 fret nut they'd made out of brass. They made it out of brass, and it turns out, as 0 frets are notorious for doing, it notched itself to hell before it had even left the shop, with the result that you couldn't bend a note anywhere without it going click, and it was hideous. And it was just simply a terrible product decision to make something, even stainless steel frets, 0 frets, notch without you even playing the guitar, because the permanent loading, 24/7 loading of the string loading on the frets, on the fret, the 0 fret, is so great that it'll just wear a notch into it. So anyway, they became aware of it. Graphtec cleverly brought out this thing here, which actually dropped perfectly into the Gibson's brass cradle underneath, and returned it back to a slotted thing rather than a 0 fret. So it undid the 0 fret thing altogether, in case you weren't confident in it. So it allowed you to convert the Gibson frame into a normal nut with all the benefits of the Teflon in the Graphtec nut. So I saw that and I thought, wait a minute, I could use that, perfect, an adjustable nut, if only I could make a bass. And so I started hand making these basses out of resin, milliput, you name it. And then eventually a kind friend made some on 3D printer for me, and since then I've been using them that way ever since, and I go through loads of them, and it really makes a massive difference. There is a limitation, obviously, because they're 12-inch radius usually, pretty much, so they only tend to work for standard-ish Les Paul style guitars, as opposed to other more exotic 3-a-side tuner guitars that you may also want an adjustable nut for. And there are sort of solutions that I've been working on to kind of convert regular nuts into adjustable ones, and that works pretty well for Strats. I've got lots of guitars set up with adjustable nuts in a Strat slot, but a bit more difficult for an end shelf like this. Anyway, that's how I came across them. But so we've cured the tuning problem with the material of the nut by choosing Teflon impregnated Tusk XL or whatever it's called. We've also solved the problem of not having to rough up or hack into the slots by bringing the slots up to the correct height instead of cutting downwards. So that's good. And the other 50%, that's the nut 50% of the tuning. And the other 50%, I promise you, is this. Stretching the slack out of the strings. Once you do that, once you've done that stretching, this guitar will stay in tune forever. And I'm doing that stretching 2 or 3 times with thumb and forefinger. With 9s, you have to be a little bit careful when you get to the high E that you don't squeeze too hard and break it. 8s will break once in a while as well, but here we have stretching to get rid of the excess slack. And if you do this for the longer you do it until it doesn't detune at all, the more you're going to enjoy tuning stability later on. So if you're impatient and you shortchange yourself, then you'll be tuning for a bit longer. So how much is left to go, you can hear. More stretch is usually held in the wound strings. Right, I'll do one more stretching. I'll give it a bit of a sort of pull here as well. And then we'll take care of the intonation. But this is the stretching is 50% of your tuning stability. It's really important. See how little we have to do? It's very nearly there. So, everything good. Check the intonation now. So we do that by, where's my jack lead? Guitar lead, that's what it's called. Where's my guitar lead gone? So we're going to try this out. We'll just check the jack socket is in good order and it's not loose or anything, and I'm going to put this over here and just do a quick test. Now I tend to try and lift up the back end of guitars when they have a jack plug sticking out like that because I don't want it bashing against the floor. So volume up, and the idea is we ping the harmonic at the 12th fret, make sure it's tuned to E, and then we fret the 12th fret and it should be the same note, which it is. Yep. Okay. Now the thing is with this type of bridge, it's kind of fixed, mostly fixed intonation pattern. So if you find that it requires adjusting, Is that too low now? That's sounding a fraction too low. Now, just on the mark. The high E is down at if you are out of intonation, what you need to do is you use the adjusters at the back of the bridge to push it that way or that way to get a little extra. But the relationship here, apart from this adjustable bit as we saw in the beginning, is fixed, so it leaves you with these two gross adjusters, if you like. But that is done, ladies and gentlemen. Ready to go back in its bag, and thank you for watching. Look out for the next one, which is the supposedly the same guitar, only distressed. It'd be interesting to see. Oh, by the way, no, I'm not completely done. The thing I have to do, let's just do this before we go and put it away. I just need to move all of these out of the way. I think we need to get a strap. We need to bring out the amp and see if this plays without this weird crackling, or if it's just something that's happening at home, which is okay if it is. Now this microphone pickup system really didn't like loud guitar noise the other day. It seemed to pretty much break it, so God knows what will happen now. Right, let's see if we can recreate that strange sputtering sound, because frankly I have no suggestion, I have no clue what might cause it. There wouldn't be anything obvious that comes to mind. It always comes on with the booster right full on and the reverb on. Don't know why. Might be the interference at home. always wondered, can you get done for playing some chords even though you don't sing the tune? Is that allowed in this world? Well, that's okay. Must be some weird thing going on where I sit down. It's not surprising because there's about 1,000 USB chargy things going on all the time. And there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Wow, that is a light and easy to play Les Paul Junior style. I hope that was useful. Hope you enjoyed that, Jonathan. Number 1 of 5. Yeah, it was some interesting little quirks along the way. But there we have it. Back in the bag. Ready to go back to the spare room. And the bag will be reused, filled up with the next one tomorrow. And I think tomorrow I'm going to do the other V120 as well, while it's fresh in the mind, and while we get ready to chop off the nut again. And this time, fingers crossed, well, we'll do our very best again to get it off with minimal damage. But I'm afraid ultimately, when it comes down to it, there is a bit of blame that pertains, or whatever the word is, to Musser's Vintage and the Vietnamese factory, maybe, wherever it is. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you again tomorrow.